Hey, welcome. I'm so thrilled to see all of you. My name is Solveig Øvstebø, and I'm the Director and Chief Curator of Astrup Fearnley Museet. And thank you so much for joining us tonight for this lecture by the brilliant Hamza Walker, who will be discussing Kara Walker's extraordinary work, The Sovereign Citizen Sequencentennial Civil War Celebration 2013, which we have right here. And this is a work that we're so lucky to have in our collection here at the Astrup Fearnley Museet, and which is also part of our current exhibition, Before Tomorrow. This talk and the talks that we're doing this fall are chances to dig into the works that we have on show. And we wanted to discuss this work. We thought about who could best do it. And there's no other person I know that know Kara Walker's work better. Maybe he's the one that knows it best, maybe even almost as best as the artist. That's how long Hamza Walker has been working with Kara Walker and alongside, and still is actually on several projects. And in many respects, then, we are here in a possibility to look into this and to also have other perspectives on her practice than what we are just seeing in this particular piece. Hamza Walker was involved in Kara Walker's first solo exhibition at the University of Chicago and the Renaissance Society in 1997, and he contributed to the exhibition catalogue, which has since been a key reference of her practice. It's an amazing catalogue that unfortunately is out of print, right, Hamza? Yeah. Very sad, but it's beautiful. So if you're in any library, anywhere you can get a hold of it and to look through it, it's really worth the chance. And this show was part of Hamza's record of stellar exhibitions while working at the Renaissance Society from 1994 to 2016 as a curator. And this is also where we first worked together. So I'm extra thrilled to have Hamza here in Norway for the first time in Oslo. And since 2016, Hamza Walker has been the director of the non-for-profit art space LAXART in Los Angeles, where he's now based. And he has in between and since written and lectured extensively on contemporary art, and was also curator of the biennial Made in LA in 2016. And if you'd like to go into the Renaissance Society website, you can see all those shows that are seminal and incredibly important shows from from the end of the 1990s through the 2010. So I really recommend that. There's amazing work from Hamza in that archive. And I am so thrilled and thankful that you are here with us tonight. And this talk, as I said, take part of our Before Tomorrow live program, which is curated by Owen Martin with Inger Fure Grøttin and Marta Andersen. And this is a series of performances, screenings, and talks which react to the artworks and the themes in Before Tomorrow. And it is currently ongoing until the beginning of December, so follow our website and you'll see that there are a lot of dates, and I think you also have a sheet here where you can mark those dates in your calendar. And they're open for all and free, so please join us on this program. And after this talk, there will be an opportunity to ask questions to Hamza and about the work and comment. And with that, I give the podium to you, Hamza. Welcome. Thank you.
God, I'm so thrilled to be here. This is really, really, really wonderful. It's really very special invite from Solveig to come and do this. And I was asked to clarify, which I will by way of anecdote, my relationship to Kara Walker. We are not related, just to set the record straight. And the two of us had to deal with that when we gave our first interviews in 1997. When she did the show at the Renaissance Society in 1996. And, we would say that to, I remember Fred Camper, Chicago Reader, he was doing the interview. And, he knew that, but he said, okay, I'll have to put this in print. So usually he had the standard line, Hamza Walker and Kara Walker, no relation is usually in parentheses what people say. And so Kara and I, given the nature of Kara's work, incest or the incestuousness of the vignettes, we decided to append that line. So it became Hamza Walker and Carol Walker, no relation that they know of. So there we go. That's the formal way that we explain our relationship. And so I'm not going to talk so much about, or at all really about this particular piece. I'm going to go off-road this evening. And this is a way of, I guess, keeping things fresh. I've written on, a few essays on Kara's work for Parquet, for her show at the Renaissance Society, for another book, Witness to Her Art. And the beautiful thing about this business, contemporary art and working with artists, it's sometimes you think of it as one and done. You work with artists, but in a lot of instances, it's about relationships, and relationships grow over time. And so to work with an artist and then to continue, and this is a 30-year-old me and a 28-year-old Carol Walker. So in terms of a relationship, thoughts about the work as they have evolved over time. And to think about a 30-year relationship, given the state of the world now and all that has happened, particularly after, 2020, my thoughts have evolved greatly, let's say, if only by virtue of the changing circumstances on the ground. So this is going to be largely picture-driven and also an outline in terms of putting it down. So a first draft, let's call it, of thoughts about Kara's work. Both from a bird's eye view and at times close up. Let's just put it that way as a view. So gonna start, scrounged up some very early pictures for this presentation. This is 1996, and this is something of a preamble to the more formal, informal part of the talk. This 1997, these are images, and that's the title of Kara's exhibition, the whole long thing. Presenting Negro scenes drawn upon my passage through the South and reconfigured for the benefit of enlightened audiences wherever such may be found. By myself, Mrs. K.E.B. Walker. Even in the title, obviously, it's taken from a very standard 19th century kind of roadshow carnival title in terms of its length, Victorian. But K.E.B. Walker is a joke about Madam C.J. Walker, for those of you who might know who Madam C.J. Walker is. Madam C.J. Walker is, according to the Guinness Book of World Records from way back when, the first female self-made millionaire. And she was black, and she made her money on the beauty industry. So she has a very prominent place, not just internationally in a way, but particularly in American history. So anybody reading that in America would know Madam C.J. Walker, it comes as a loaded joke. So I thought I would just show these images. Sorry for the lighting a little bit. These were actually taken by Suzanne Guez, who was the director of the Renaissance Society, where she would casually document the exhibitions, which was quite beautiful. She always had a little Kodak Instamatic camera with slide film in it, funny enough. And I love you could see the edges on these, that they were scanned from slides. So this is Kara actually doing the exhibition. She made about 70% of the show on site. And so improvisation, really key part of her practice. Or I think it's under-discussed, let's put it that way. It's probably more implicit rather than an explicit part of what she does. And in this, right here, this is her, those are her X-Acto knife, chalk, and somewhere in here is her sketchbook that she just has open. Very crude sketches that she does regularly, every day. So she was out and about going and seeing exhibitions during the day. She would come back to the society and then work on the exhibition in the evenings. So she worked both in the gallery And so she would unroll large sheets of black photo backdrop paper. She draws the image in chalk on the black paper and then cuts it out. And then the reverse of that, right, the chalk side is hung against the wall. So, and it's quite interesting to see her make, in terms of the style of drawing, the multiple lines, and then she makes the cut, right? So you can see, well, you probably can't see it as well with the mode of drawing, right? That's her sketchbook. So, right, so we ran out of space in the gallery. I was on 2 walls, so we then had to unroll the paper in the hallway leading up to the gallery. The Renaissance Society is in a building that's a classroom facility. So students were walking up and down the corridor in between classes while she was doing the exhibition. Right, that's just, I mean, she must have been there for a couple weeks. Right, so now the final product. So she's done about 20 of the panoramic diorama pieces of this scale, right, in total, maybe just over 20. And that was between, this one dates from 2013, so between 1994 and 2013, so, roughly a 20-year period that she really produced. She did a number of smaller vignettes, but again, the large scale cycles. So 20 over that 20-year period, let's say. And let me see if I can get a detail. Yeah, here. This vignette, and I watched her do it, is taken. There was a Degas show at the Art Institute when she was in Chicago. And, a number of the pieces, Degas and the Bathers. So there were a number of paintings, pastels, Degas basically like looking through the keyhole at naked ladies. Or at least that's Kara's, I would say, accurate interpretation. And so in response, that's where that bather comes from with the towel. It's lifted right out of Degas drawings that she had seen just hours before. And then she just, juxtaposed it with the mammy with the big dripping tongue. All made up on the spot, just for the hell of it. And that was one of the last vignettes that she would put in the show. And that's in terms of, she can think it, she sees it, she thinks it, she draws it. So the speed at which she's working is very, very fast. Right. All right. So now that's one thing I wanted to share. Now that's Madam C.J. Walker, by the way. I was just looking her up if you want to get a picture. There she is, down low. Okay, view. Enter full screen. Okay. So now this diorama, and this is a flattened fold-out version of what is one of her biggest pieces. It's called Slavery, Slavery, Slavery from 1997. So immediately after she did the one at the Renaissance Society, she did this piece at the Walker Art Center. It's chock-a-block. And Robert Hobbs has actually just produced, this book just hit stands a month ago for Karma. And it's 2 lectures by Robert Hobbs. He did a show with her right after, began working with her around 98, 99 for her piece that would then go into the Sao Paulo biennial of 2000, 2002, I think 2000, maybe. And these are 2 essays that he wrote around that time that were never published. He wrote one for the Sao Paulo biennial that was never reprinted in the States, and the second one he wrote for a show she had in Germany. And so they finally went back, found those 2 essays, and reproduced them here. And Hobbes did a really great thing. It's, I think, the only thing on record where Kara actually goes through and talks about vignette by vignette in a piece where the pieces are coming from. So with slavery, now this is how it was installed at the Walker, right? So she had them make curved walls, so it was a full panorama, right? Lots of visual material from the 19th century and 20th century that she draws from. She also draws some literature equally. So Harlequin romance novels, right? The Civil War, pre-Civil War romance novel, the zenith of which is Gone with the Wind, right? Which actually, Gone with the Wind, I'm calling it the zenith of the genre. In fact, Gone with the Wind was basically the start of a genre, of an industry, right? Eastman Johnson, My Old Kentucky Home. That's the painting she used as the basis for slavery. And perhaps the two things that she really drew from in the painting, the roof scene, and then in the lower right, there is a woman with children getting ready for a parade or a carnival. So this was the what she was thinking about loosely when she came up with that, with the piece. And so I took these right out of Hobbes's book, and I'll just run through, in her words, how she's describing the vignettes. Oh, you can. I didn't know whether or not you'd be able to read them from way back where. I generally began reading Slavery, which is the title of the piece, from the central moon, and then move out in both directions. This is the way I constructed it initially. Actually, it was moon, fountain, house. 3 points on the compass, on the Walker compass. Beginning under the crescent moon, a woman vomits. I think of her as more African than slave, although her offspring behind her is beginning to resemble a peculiarly, I can never say peculiarly, it's very difficult, even in English, a peculiarly American sort of pickaninny. To the right of the woman vomiting, the vomiting woman, the mistress inspects a topsy-turvy doll and finds, instead of heads, one black and one white, only bottoms and legs. Beyond the little big house is a European-styled Sambo in Turkish garb who sprays perfume under the skirts of a white woman whose proximity to blackness, especially in paintings, signifies her position as a prostitute. Her black mask confirms this. Next to her, a white man, something of a nigger lover, bows at her feet of an all-giving black girl, bows at the feet of an all-giving black girl fountain. He farts his pleasure. Puffs of perfume and gas resemble speech bubbles. The base of the fountain of you, as opposed to the fountain of youth, has a skull and a monkey. The fountain offers milk, blood, piss, spit, or vomit, coffee, tea, or me. Or, from childhood water fountain games, coffee, tea, milkshake, pee. On the edge of the rooftop is an interracial coupling. There is a too young soldier boy. A watermelon is hatching. Granny dances with a small child and is prepared to take the child out of this charade. A voodoo dancer and drummer replace the banjo player from the Eastman Johnson painting. A chicken appears with its head cut off, and a cut off head replaces the one that is missing. The girl child, eating an apple with her baby on her back, casually carts off the hay toward town and does not notice the pile of dung ahead or the KKK eyes in the North Star above. Again, this is one more that didn't have her comments, which are later in the book. And this vignette is from a larger slave market scene. The slave market consists of a trader who has a small cigar and a particular interest in making larger ones. The master threatens the young master baiter, her words, with how it feels. And that's the hand in the gun-shaped mouth. So those were Kara's descriptions. Robert Hobbes got her to run through one of her pieces, which I think is quite beautiful. It's the only one I can find on record where she actually gives pretty much a caption in terms of how she was thinking in narrative form about these vignettes. And so I think they're one, improvisation. I don't think the work is really discussed in terms of how loose it is, how on the spot it is, right? How spontaneous it is in some sense. Two, it's a product of the imagination, which I think is really, really key. And I'll talk a little bit later about why that's critical in her work, right? All right. So now, this is actually the beginning of the talk in a formal sense. This is the stereotype. Possession of one's own image. It can't be overstated, the fact that representations of African Americans were not within their control and existed in advance of their ability to make them. And the creation of stereotypes in advance of their ability to have a sense of self-possession, ownership, make images of themselves. There were no, African American images by African Americans, right? So can't go to a start. One of the minstrelsy, the early 19th century, its role in popular entertainment can't be overstated. It is one of the dominant forms of entertainment in the United States over the course of the 19th century. And now that would coincide with the ability to reproduce images, photography, lithography. So, and to give a sense of how long these things went on, thought I would start here, right? Aunt Jemima. Okay. This is a piece by Kara. Oh my God, I'm blanking on the Sugar Sphinx that she did at the Domino Sugar Factory in Brooklyn, New York. Aunt Jemima started before she became a staple of pancake mix. She minstrelsy song and dance. That's where she got her beginning, 1876, thereabouts. And it was picked up by a flour mill in terms of making the early mixes, self-rising mixes for things, right? Aunt Jemima finally died in 2020, right? From 1890 to 2020. That's how long this went on. She underwent some changes. In the mid-'80s, they gave her a perm. But just to give you a sense of how we are, in fact, living through history, it was only 2020, right? This is after George Floyd's murder that they finally decided, okay, we're finally going to remove her. She's being retired, right? All right. But to go back to the beginning, jump Jim Crow. And Jim Crow, Big Daddy Rice was a performer, 1828, blackface minstrelsy. This is was the hit sensation, and pretty much as a form of entertainment, it would grow over the course of the 19th century, right? And this would be white performers performing in blackface, right? And Big Daddy Rice was, in his day, he was huge. as an entertainer. Right, so to think about the translation of blackface minstrelsy then into film. So the very first sound film, Al Jolson in The Jazz Singer, 1927. So the transition from one art form to another art form, from theater into film and television, right? Popular forms of entertainment then and going. Now, this is 1927, right? So before 1915, The Birth of a Nation, right? Now that's the first kind of epic film blockbuster, right? D.W. Griffith, 1915. And what's interesting in terms of blackface was the mixture of white actors in blackface and black actors in D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, in 1915, right? These things in terms of cartoons, growing up with Bugs Bunny, Warner Brothers, right? These existed well into my childhood and are still presented today, right? Even though now when you buy the box DVD set, as I did for my children, it comes with a disclaimer. The disclaimer's not bad. And I was shocked. I bought the box set for my daughter in 2002, and I was actually shocked when I read the disclaimer. You know, so the survival of these stereotypes, right? Sheet music, right? Reams and reams and reams of sheet music. No end to this stuff, right? So this is before Aunt Jemima became a pancake mix, right? This is Jemima's Wedding Day. So Martin Sachs, this is a piece of sheet music for the cakewalk, right? So the role and place of this kind of imagery, all manner of flotsam and jetsam, well beyond its life in advertising, right? Just to give a sense, collectibles. So, self-representation. 1900. W.E.B. Du Bois, the World's Fair in Paris. He is asked to participate, and they put together a very small portion of it given over to African American life. And one of the things that W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, 4 or 5 men who were involved with the creation of this exposition about Negro life, representation was key. W.E.B. Du Bois said, no, we have to put different kinds of pictures out in the world, dignified representations of Black life. So he worked with a number of photographers to take images, over 300 pictures, of the range of Black life. I mean, he didn't just want it to focus on the wealthiest sector, but middle class life, the full gamut, but dignified representations of Blacks was the key driving point for him, right? So this is Georgia. Right, so a number of portraits, right? Again, there's over 300 pictures, most of whom we don't know who the photographers that he worked with are. Right. And I can't remember her name. She has a name, and she's a student at, I believe, Fisk University. And I really like these 2 portraits. Right? So you have sharecroppers, essentially, right? Same time, working the fields, right? This is 1900, so this is 35 years after the formal end of slavery, right? Alongside a Black service union, right? In the service industry, waiters. Right? Black drugstore, Here's the outside, here's the inside. Right, so black businesses, black churches, number of photographs of black churches. Right. And I'm going to blank on his name, but he was one of the photographers who worked with W.E.B. Du Bois. And he's the only photographer who's named in the project. But I like the fact that he included this particular photograph of his 5 sons and their musical ensemble with his white neighbor. Right, it's a very beautiful portrait, I think. Right, so W.E.B. Du Bois, on the beat in 1900, 35 years after the formal end of slavery, trying to make representations of blacks that would combat stereotypes, right? So the motif in the representations of blacks that would haunt all the way up into the present day, you can't really talk about. It's a matrix. Images of blacks are not neutral, and just because of historical circumstances, never can be, right? They are always weighed. It's a matrix of positive representations versus negative representations, right? It's always been a kind of war of representations from day one because of the issue of not having self-possession, let alone possession of one's own image. So, think of that as key, right? And that's the field out of which this kind of, these representations were produced, right, over the course of the 19th century. All right? So now, these objects, and to this day, they could go by the name black collectibles. There's a burgeoning market since the mid-'80s and that's after the civil rights movement, right? That a market for these objects would really take off, right? So to think about the civil rights movement, I mean, if you want to put dates on the civil rights movement, Emmett Till's murder, 1955 to Martin Luther King's death in 1968, right? If we're going to, formally try and bracket the civil rights movement as a rupture, as a break. So collecting these things, notably, it's said that upwards of 70 to 80% of the collectors of this kind of memorabilia, which I refer to as Negrobilia, are black, right? And a sense of owning this as a representation of another era, right? The Jim Crow era. And so for those of you who don't know, the Jim Crow era is defined by, you've got the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. Reconstruction is 1865 to 1877. Reconstruction is the period right after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. The 13th frees the slaves. The 14th Amendment recognizes them as citizens. The 15th Amendment gives them the right to vote. Reconstruction is a very, very, very turbulent, very important period in American history. It's first times that blacks have political representations, political clout. So even throughout the South, which had lost the war, you had what were called fusion tickets. So the Republican Party, which is not today's Republican Party, this is the Republican Party of another era, they courted the black vote in the South. And in order to court the black vote, they had what were called fusion tickets. So you actually had tickets where you would have a white governor and a black lieutenant governor, for example, right? Versus the Democratic Party, right? So it was the Republican Party that was courting the black vote from 1865 up through 1877. 1877 marks the formal end of Reconstruction, and that's pretty much seen as a deal between Grover Cleveland coming into office and cutting a deal with Southern Democrats, meaning Southern Democrats, the states could have their way with respect to how they wanted to control the lives of black folk if it was a very tight election. if they would acknowledge him as president. So that was the deal, and that announces the end of Reconstruction proper. So from 1865 to 1877 is seen as this flourishing of black political power and the coming of a black middle class. So when Du Bois took those photographs, that's a new black subject that had come into being, right? One generation, essentially, a generation and a half out of the Civil War, right? That you have black-owned businesses, black neighborhoods, so that's all new. So Du Bois is making those pictures as a way of countering negative representations of blacks, which had gone on over the course of the 19th century. So just to give you kind of lay of the land. Fast forward, late 20th century, civil rights movement. First civil rights legislation, 1964, 65, 68. Obviously, with the passage of civil rights legislation, it wasn't as if these objects just disappeared out of nowhere, right? By the 1980s, a market was created for these objects. And again, like I said, notably black collectors of these things who wanted a palpable artifact of what was, between the end of Reconstruction up through the civil rights movement, that these were representations, history, basically, right? To never want to forget, essentially, right? This is how we were shown when we didn't control images of ourselves, basically, right? So black memorabilia, negrobilia, huge market. And it was minted in the 1980s, and I'll talk a little bit later about a particular exhibition called Ethnic Notions. That's what really kind of, the boom in collecting negrobilia kind of started in the mid-80s. But even before then, in the 1960s, you had artists who wanted to address the notion of the stereotype. So here's Aunt Jemima as she appears in artwork right after the passage of civil rights legislation. So this is Jeff Donaldson, and this is Aunt Jemima versus the Pillsbury Doughboy, who's represented as a cop. 1963, Jeff Donaldson. And that's Jeff Donaldson in the upper right. He was a member of Afro Cobra, a group of black artists very active in the 1960s in Chicago. Right. 1964, this is Joe Overstreet. 1964, 1970, I think he made the painting in 1964, but then he stretched it as a three-dimensional, sculpture in 1970. The new Aunt Jemima, right? She's become a black nationalist militant. Right. This is Murray DePillars. This is perhaps the most famous of the representations of Aunt Jemima during the latter part of the 60s in black nationalism, right? She is seen, who is she going to spank with that spatula? And on the side, there we go, better detail, it's the Black Power salute. So this is 1968. This is after the Olympic Games in 1968 when Juan Carlos Williams and Tony, I'm going to blank on Tony's last name, where they raised their hands with the black love on, right? So this piece was made in response to the Black Power salute in 1968, like it's a lithograph, hot off presses. So this one probably had the greatest circulation. So this is a very well-known image, Murray DePillars did this piece. Betty Saar, 1972, liberation of Aunt Jemima, broom in her right hand, right? Rifle in her left hand. 1973, this is also Betty Saar. This is the Aunt Jemima Molotov cocktail. Right? You've got the Black Power fist inside the bottle. Right? This is mid to late 70s, and this is Faith Ringgold, one of her quilts, Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima? Right? And this is Robert Colescott. Can't blank on the name. It's got this very silly name. Decoux. It's down there in the base. I don't have my glasses on. This is what I think. When I see Decoux, something like that is what it says, the base of it. title. But just to let you know, a number of black artists engaged with the stereotype immediately in the wake of the passage of civil rights legislation. Right? Betty Saar goes back to it. So not only does she deals with it in 1972 with the liberation of Aunt Jemima, which is an iconic piece, but then she returns to it in the 1990s. I mean, she'd made a smattering of pieces in the intervening years, but then she had a whole exhibition of these washboard pieces that she did with Aunt Jemima in the 1970s, right? So turning African masks into puppets, right? So Betty Saar is a very interesting case, and I would make the argument that she really returns to Aunt Jemima in part because of this exhibition, Ethnic Notions. This is 1982. It's the first exhibition of a major collection of Negrobilia to take place, right? Janet Faulkner, she goes throughout the United States, collects this stuff. It goes up and it really creates a market for Negrobilia, right? Which is still thriving to this day. And it's against that backdrop. And Betty Saar is something of very important in terms of as an intergenerational figure, right? She belongs to a generation of artists working throughout the 1960s who takes up the civil rights, right? Then she comes back in the 1990s to take it on again after this exhibition. So there's a whole new generation that has to engage with images, stereotypes, blackface. Kara belongs to that generation of artists in the 90s, right? Round two, right? So here's a collection, a prominent collection. Now this collection is actually owned Ed Williams. That's who started this collection back in the 80s. Ed Williams, he worked for a bank in Chicago, Chicago Title and Trust. He, getting old, he decided he wanted to sell his collection of Negrobilia. And who was there in the auction when he decided to sell it? Theaster Gates. So Theaster bought the Ed Williams collection, keeping it in the family. So 10,000 objects strong, right? So colored segregated water fountains, right? And now some of the arguments around this are about buying it in order to take it out of circulation, buying it in order to keep a memory, right, of when we didn't have, self-possession, and by extension, being able to control representation of oneself, right? Entertainment, lots and lots of sheet music, right? And the purchase that this stuff had within American popular culture can't be overstated, right? Here's the makeup. And now the original makeup was, if any of you saw Bamboozle, Spike Lee's film from 2002, I think around 2002, sorry, 2000 or 2002, where he shows how blackface was originally done, where you would use the egg yolk and you would char cork. That was the way to get that deep and rich a black, and then you would coat your face. So the first 10 minutes of that film, 20 minutes of the film, where he's showing the process. I mean, the film is a film. The film is uneven. It's Spike. But that's amazing to me when he showed how the process of 19th century blackface was actually done. And then later, you could just buy the makeup at Walgreens. Right? This is in Theaster's collection. Now Theaster's collection of stuff. Let's just give a sense. Right? So now, round two. Another generation. These are Kara's contemporaries in the 90s who were engaged with blackface, right? This is Beverly McIver. Right, so this is her from 1994, a whole series of paintings. The clown, the watermelon, 98, should be one. Michael Ray Charles, right? From, I think, the earliest piece I have in here, and he's still doing work. It's toned down a little bit. Not this direct. This is mid-90s work by him. Right? And now toys are a whole subgenre within Negrobilia. right? So this is, 1992. Yeah, you think, therefore I am. It's 92. Yeah. This would be an early one. Right? And then Kerry James Marshall is also working this period. So, he belongs right alongside in terms of, now, the formal differences between their work are quite notable, right? So this is Kerry from 90, this is Kerry in 96, this body of work. Right? The housing projects, Chicago. The Lost Boys series. So yeah, so 80, is the Lost Boys 89? No, that's a death date. Lost Boys date from 92, 94. Right? Now, Kerry is doing this under completely different auspices. So there was a moment when people were like, well, I don't know about how I feel about, his figures being so black, right? Whereas Michael Ray Charles, the irony is worn on its sleeve. So it's very, very direct. Whereas with Kerry, there was a certain kind of ambivalence, and rightfully so. Right, Kerry's is a form of portraiture, but I would say that they have an entirely different vibe than Michael Ray Charles, obviously, or even Beverly McIver. Right, Kerry is the reduction of the black experience. Right, Kerry has no problem at all. Super Soul Brother #1, as I like to call him. Ideology. Kerry's an ideologue. He's ideologically driven. He'll be the first person to tell you that. So what he wanted to say is, no. I'm going to reduce this shit to say there is a thing called the black experience. I don't want to get into different shades of brown, but it's monolithic enough to be able to say we. So the black figure equals a reduction, so as to be able to say we, right? So it isn't that his blackface and Michael Ray Charles's blackface are two entirely different blackfaces, in my opinion. And notably enough, with Kerry's, whether or not the character is making direct eye contact with you or they're withdrawn is very important to me. Michael Ray Charles, it's always in your face, right? And they're drawing on circus banners, right? So they have very much a spectacle orientation. Whereas Kerry's, in some instances, especially with this series, where they have like the lowered lids and the eyes, they're always staring off or just over you, right? And other worlds. So the reference to me, especially in this, when he was doing these paintings in 94, 95, right? Here I Am, it's a very large painting, Campfire Girls, right? And with Kerry, it's always a question about participation in American life, right? So Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, right? Camping, the water park, Great America. That was the name of a very big amusement park in the United States in the 1980s. Our Town, right? So this kind of ambivalence about Black people's ability to participate in a kind of Leave It to Beaver world. Right? Now, here's the difference between Kerry and Michael Ray Charles. Right? Kerry would have more, I would say, in common with Renaissance painting, right? Where the eyes are lowered, the lids, where the gaze is much more about another world, perhaps a world to come, right? Thoughts of a better life, if not heaven, right? And now here's a body of work from 1998, and I had the pleasure, well, I've known Kerry for forever, but in a professional sense, working with him on this show at the Renaissance Society in 1998, he created this cycle of paintings, right, where the relationship to religious painting and Renaissance painting, very straight up. So Kara and her use of the paper cutout, right? I would say it's really important that unlike Kerry, unlike Michael Ray Charles, unlike Betty Saar, Kara's figures never acknowledge, they don't even know you're here. They never look at you. They are moving this way along the wall, right? You can say that there's like, you know, the X, Y axis. You could talk about a Z axis, but you can only talk about that z-axis as it goes back from the picture plane, not as it comes forward out into our world, right? They never acknowledge you at all. They're in a world completely of their own where fucking, cutting, bludgeoning, killing, right? This is, it's of Looney Tunes cartoon proportion, right? This is squarely the product of her imagination, right? So, and I think that's really, really important, and that there's no moral valence here, right, in her work. You know, think it, draw it. Could be beautiful, could be horrific, right? So, just in terms of formal differences, right? Again, the Michael Ray Charles addressing you. Kara doesn't address you. They go this way across the wall. You're not even, they're not aware of you. All right, so here, Jason Rhodes, Black Pussy. Installation Jason Rhodes did not long before he died in 2006, I believe, right? And it's interesting, the relationship to artistic freedom. I got into a really beautiful, beautiful discussion. It wasn't, I don't know what to call it, a tangle. Me and Paul McCarthy, incredible. It was a dinner. We're at a big table. We ended up sitting across from one another. And what it was is it must have been Jason Rhodes. They just had a show of Jason Rhodes' work at Hauser and Wirth in LA. And Paul and I got into it in a way that people at the table could kind of see me. And if you know Paul is not one, he lives for this shit. So we were tangling and people at the table could see, it's like, man, whatever's going on between Hamza and Paul is kind of intense. And Paul was saying, no, artistic freedom at all costs, right? That is paramount. Artistic freedom. And I was saying, well, that freedom, what you're talking about, there's another framework for, I don't think of that necessarily as a zenith. And what about the discussion about artistic freedom is predicated on abstraction, right? In autonomous art, you can say whatever you want, right? This is the bond, the relationship between the artist and the audience, right? So you can say whatever you want, you can be free. But as an audience, I'll no longer be able to follow you, right? So basically, you're severing the bond between the artist and the audience, right? Artistic autonomy at any price, right? I don't understand what you're doing. What is it a picture of? Is it a duck? Is it a rabbit? I can't make it out. Is it a splatter? What's going on? It's like, this is freedom, right? But what if the relationship between the artist and the audience is what about that bond, right? What does it mean to say, it's like, no, I want to represent. I don't want to rupture that bond. There's actual power in being able to speak on someone's behalf, should they grant it to you, right? So when Kerry James Marshall says, the whole thing about artists throughout the 1960s saying, it's like, I don't want to be a black artist. I just want to be an artist, right? As though suddenly being delimited by, race, gender, ethnicity, right, was somehow not allowing you to attain the lofty summits of a free, autonomous art, right? And what's beautiful about Kerry is he says, nah, I want to be a black artist. What's wrong with that, right? Flying totally in the face of a trajectory of, where abstraction and autonomy is privilege, right? What does it mean to say, nah, I want to represent people, right? I want to have an audience, God damn it, right? So what about that bomb, right? And privileging that over freedom, right? So that's what was that, and that's when Paul and I were getting into it, right? And I was saying, no, we got to rethink the terms of that, right? Artistic freedom at any price, right? So Carrie is like, no. I want to respect the bond between, myself and my audience. I want to be able to speak on behalf of people who historically haven't had a voice. So that's where this slide comes from. Just thinking about Jason Rhodes and talking about Paul McCarthy in relationship to Jason Rhodes, and he had a bar called Black Pussy and a whole body of work called Black Pussy. And so, artistic freedom. And so Paul was championing Jason Rhodes along the lines of maximum artistic freedom, right? So Jackson Pollock, he's just a stand-in, let's say, right, for artistic freedom, right? Representation, no representation. And this is Carrie James Marshall, right? I love these paintings. Right? Black Scout leader, right? But when I think about this is Kara Walker. So just thinking about Kara Walker, it's a couple thoughts. One, it's her engagement with a figure, and I'll go forward real quick, right? With Jason Rhodes, it's not about, so everybody's like, it's like, oh my God, Black Pussy, he's saying it, it's offensive, take it down, or whatever, or the subsequent reappraisals of Jason Rhodes' work. When I think about The Sugar Sphinx by Kara Walker, right? And for those of you who've seen, this thing is that's I don't know, 20, 30 feet high. This is the old Domino Sugar Factory in terms of the scale of this piece. You've got a mammy sphinx, right? Total ass out in the back. And you can see the genitals, which are blurry here. And thinking about in relationship to Jason Rhodes, and I got into so many arguments with friends subsequently about Kara Walker's piece, it's, okay, Jason, that's fine. You want to talk about Black Pussy? Well, let's talk about Black Pussy, motherfucker. So I feel like it's like Kara is going at Jason Rhodes toe to toe. I'm finally saying it's like, oh, no. In terms of controlling representation, right? Not like, oh, you can't say that, or let's put that away. But it's like, oh, no. While you're in the corner making your pieces that want to talk about it, it's like, oh, I want to talk about Black Pussy too. That's something we have in common. And so I feel like it's like her doing the Sphinx is just like, it's like, yeah, what about Black Pussy? And so that is, and again, on the terms of figuration, right? It's not, and when I think about Kara, I think, it's not, is she a contemporary artist? Right? I feel like, okay, she's, in terms of, and again, what the stakes are, when I was thinking about Carrie James Marshall, you are free to be unfree, right? Is being free the pinnacle of representation? Actually, being able to represent and speak on others' behalf might be as, if not more important, than absolute artistic freedom. So, what does it mean to then engage with that in full, right? In other words, based on a certain art historical narrative and trajectory, you might just be writing yourself out of modernism and contemporary art. So be it. So what is Kara, right, under those circumstances? And I actually said, Kara, it's like, yeah, it finally hit me at a certain point that you're just on another plane. Like you're somewhere else. You're no longer, she's, of course, of the here and now and responding to this socio-political moment in full. So yes, is she a contemporary artist? Yes. But in another way, especially with her drawing, and the drawings show that toured Europe from 2-3 years ago. Oh wait, no, pandemic. That would be pre-pandemic? No, that show came out after. It was planned before the pandemic, the one that was in Basel. And so it was planned before the pandemic, but they opened it only in like 2020, just a couple of years ago. So not that long ago, now I think about it. But in thinking about her drawings, right, where it became apparent, and people had mentioned this, right, her relationship to like Blake, her relationship to Goya, right, that suddenly it's like, no, you know, maybe some aspect of her, she's not a contemporary artist, right, especially when you look at the drawings, right, and especially in terms of like, I talked about that issue about the imagination, right, that's where she's free to roam and free to go, wherever she might land in terms of art making, right? Especially through the drawings. So that's a key. Just one of the thoughts. I think as of late, the extent to which she is a contemporary artist. And I'll stop there. We can have question and answers insofar as I can answer anything. I don't know. But yeah, just in terms of where my head is with Kara right now. And I'm working with her on a project, on a very big project, and that involves decommissioned Confederate monuments. And so really being able to pose that question, and I did ask her, I was like, are you a contemporary artist anymore? And she just laughed, you know, about it, which means she didn't say, of course. She's just like, I don't know. Well, thank you. Thank you. Great.